Part 69 of the Chronicles of Crime, Volume 1, by Camden Pelham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 69. James Hardy Rowe, transported for privately stealing. Part 2. Returning to the Eight Bells, I imparted my adventures to my friend, who was of course much pleased at my success, for I had realised between £4 and £5. I found this begging scheme so productive that I was in no hurry to pursue the Portsmouth speculation, and as we were both satisfied with our present quarters, it was agreed that we should continue a few days longer in Kingston, in which time I proposed to follow up my success by making a regular circuit among the inhabitants, and I in fact determined to levy similar contributions in every town which lay in our route. It is to be observed that this idea of raising money was perfectly original in me, for at that time I had never heard of such a practice, but have since discovered that it is a very common expedient, and is called by those persons who live by such impositions the letter racket. The following day I again sallied forth and met with equal success, visiting not only the houses of private persons, but even the respectable shopkeepers, etc., and I may here state once for all that in the course of this as well as my subsequent speculations of the same nature, I met with various receptions according to the charitable or churlish dispositions of the people to whom I applied. Many pitied my case and cheerfully relieved me. Others expressed equal commiseration, but declined giving anything, either because they never encouraged beggars, or they had poor enough of their own to maintain. Some invited me into their parlours, treated me with excessive politeness, and obliged me to take refreshment at their own tables, and where there were any young ladies in the family, I was an object of particular solicitude, and the recital of my misfortunes drew many a sigh from their tender bosoms. Others desired me, like the Mayor of Kingston, to go about my business, and hinted that I ought to be sent to the House of Correction as a vagrant. Sometimes the servants who admitted me refused to present my memorial, declaring that they had strict orders from their masters or mistresses never to trouble them on such an occasion. The donations I commonly received were from 1s. to 5. Sometimes, but rarely, I was presented with gold, particularly at the seats of the nobility and gentry, all of which lying within a short distance of the road I travelled, I made a point of calling at, and for my information on this subject I provided myself with a comprehensive Book of Roads, in which those objects are correctly laid down. Some truly charitable persons, but whose means were limited, relieved me with 6d., and of course I was bound to accept such a trifle with as much appearance of thankfulness as I would a larger sum, and frequently, when I called at a farmhouse by the roadside, I have been compelled to take some cold meat or other eatables, which I afterwards bestowed upon the first more needy beggar I met on my way. It was my custom in general to travel on foot, making short stages, and putting up at a good inn in every town I entered, where I lived upon the best during my stay, and associated with London riders and other respectable guests. When tired of walking, I availed myself of a passing stage-coach or return post-chaise, and my only equipage was a spare shirt, handkerchief, etc., which, with my Book of Roads, I carried in a small bundle under my arm. On the evening of the second day, however, he was arrested and carried before the magistrates, charged as a rogue and vagabond. He referred the magistrates to one of his grandfather's friends in London, and the inquiries there satisfying them, he was discharged out of custody on the second day of confinement, and hastened back to town, his companion having proceeded to Portsmouth. After spending one dissipated evening in London, he set out next day to Portsmouth, and, notwithstanding the check he had received 3 days earlier, he stopped in Kingston, and levied contributions in the usual way on the charitable inhabitants, avoiding, of course, that part of the town where he had been before. This practice he continued on the road, and after the payment of his expenses, he still had £15 in his pocket. On his reaching Portsmouth, his fervour for the navy cooled on his finding that his friend D had procured a situation as a merchant's clerk, and he was after some time induced to enter into the service of an attorney. A short employment was quite sufficient to satisfy his industrious fit, and he soon quitted Portsmouth in disgust, and proceeded once more towards the great metropolis. There his good fortune threw before him an opportunity, which steadiness on his part only required to render most advantageous. Dining one day at the Saracen's Head, Snow Hill, he entered into conversation with a gentleman named Kennedy, a surgeon in the navy, who, pleased with his manner and address, procured for him an appointment as midshipman on board the Astrea frigate. Delighted with the prospect of at length entering the navy, he wrote to his grandfather, who immediately furnished him with £100 to purchase an outfit. On the voyage he became weary of his position as midshipman, and the captain being in want of a clerk, he tendered his services, and was accepted. At the conclusion of a long cruise in the northern latitudes, the vessel made for England, and on their arrival in the Thames, Vaux proceeded to London. He there met with a dashing Cyprian, and, unmindful of the future, he remained with her until all his money was spent, and then he found that his vessel had sailed, carrying with her his clothes, books, and all the little property of which he was possessed. Now, driven to the greatest distress, he had recourse to the gaming table, where for a short time he contrived, by associating with professed gamblers, to procure a precarious existence. But the summer approaching, and dupes becoming fewer, he obtained by application to Messrs. Dalton and Edwards, King's Bench Walk, a situation as clerk at £1 a week, with Mr. Dalton, a solicitor, of Bury St. Edmunds. Upon the whole, says he, this was one of the most agreeable employments I ever engaged in, and, had I prudently retained it for a few years, there is no doubt I should have met with the most liberal encouragement from my employer. But my natural inconsistency still prevailed, and I had been but a few weeks at Bury before I grew tired of the country, and thought of nothing but returning to London, with such spoil as I could obtain from the credulity of the tradesmen in the town. With this view I bespoke clothes, boots, linen, and other articles at various shops, informing the parties that I should expect credit till the expiration of my quarter, to which, on account of the respectable gentleman I served, they readily consented. As soon as any of these goods were brought home, I immediately packed them up in small portable parcels, which I sent up to London by the coach, consigned to a pawnbroker with whom I was on intimate terms, desiring him to receive and keep them safe until he saw me. I also coached off in the same clandestine manner such of my own apparel, &c., as I had in my trunk, in which, to prevent discovery, I deposited stones or bricks to preserve its gravity. By these means I had nothing to impede my sudden departure, when rendered necessary by the arrival of the expected quarter day. I must here observe, to meet any surprise the reader might feel on the subject, that, as I had never at this time been connected with downright thieves, so I had never yet committed an actual theft, save the embezzlement of the money at Liverpool, which indeed the law has lately made a felonious taking. Though I therefore scrupled not at practising a fraud, I was not yet sufficiently depraved to commit a robbery. This will account for my not robbing the premises of Mr. Dalton, which at a subsequent period of my life would have been my primary object, as I had access to every part of the house, and have frequently viewed with longing eyes the servant cleaning a handsome service of plate in the pantry. I had now been about 2 months at Bury, and had no intention of absconding till the expiration of the 3rd, when an accidental event induced me to hasten my departure. One afternoon Mr. Dalton had written several letters in the office, and the footman being elsewhere engaged, he requested me to drop them in at the post office in my way home. I accordingly brought them out in my hand, and happening inadvertently to cast my eye on the superscriptions, I perceived that one was addressed to Mr. Lyne, tailor, Cecil Street, Strand, London. Being curious to know what correspondent Mr. Dalton could have with a tailor, I opened this letter, and found the contents to the following effect: Mr. Lyne, by the waggon which goes from hence on Monday next, and arrives at the Blue Boar in Bishopsgate Street on Wednesday night, I shall send you a portmanteau, corded and sealed, but not locked, containing 2 coats, 16 waistcoats, 14 pairs of breeches, and a suit of uniform of the City Light Horse. Most of these articles are nearly as good as new, but as they have now become unfashionable, I desire you will dispose of them to the best advantage on my account, and send me down by the same conveyance 2 suits made in the present taste, &c. It immediately struck me that, if I took measures accordingly, I might arrive in town time enough to intercept and obtain this trunk from the inn, for which purpose I put this letter in my pocket, and the others in the post office. The next day, happening to go into Mr. Dalton's kitchen, I there saw the portmanteau corded up and directed, and, on questioning the servant in a careless manner about it, he informed me that he was going to carry it to the inn the following evening, in readiness for the departure of the waggon. The same afternoon it happened, which was a most fortunate circumstance for me, that Mr. Dalton again begged of me to put some letters in the post office, which he had not done above twice or thrice since I came into his service. Looking at these letters, I saw to my surprise another addressed to Mr. Lyne as before, which, eagerly opening, I found was to mention something Mr. Dalton said he had forgot in his letter of the preceding day. I immediately destroyed this second letter, which, had it come to hand, might have frustrated my design. I now prepared matters for eloping, and sent off the remainder of my effects by the coach as before, but my good fortune produced another windfall, of which I had no expectation. The day before my intended departure, I was walking in the market place with a young man who was clerk to another attorney in the town, and the conversation turning upon watches, my companion observed that, if I wished to purchase one, he would introduce me to a maker of his acquaintance, who would use me well on his account. I took him at his word, and begged he would immediately do so. We were then within a few doors of the shop, into which we entered, and I perceived over the window in large characters, Lumley and Gudgeon, watchmakers. I laughed inwardly at the singularity of the latter name, which I considered ominous of my success in the imposition I meant to put upon him. After a short preliminary conversation, my acquaintance, having business to do, took his leave, and Mr. Gudgeon himself proceeded to show me several watches. I informed him that I wished to have a good one, but my circumstances would not allow me to go to a high price. Mr. Gudgeon assured me it was better to have a good one at once, and recommended me to a very handsome gilt watch, capped and jewelled, and his own make, which he said he could warrant to perform well, and for which he asked me 8 guineas. I replied that, as my weekly salary from Mr. Dalton was but £1, I could not afford to give so much, and began to examine others of a cheaper kind, but still letting him see that I had a strong inclination for the one he had recommended. This induced him to repeat his praises of the latter, and to press me with greater energy to fix upon it. I at length, with a show of much reluctance, suffered myself to be persuaded, but I begged leave to observe that, as I was influenced in everything by the advice of my good master, Mr. Dalton, I would not venture to make so expensive a purchase without his approbation; that if he would therefore entrust me with the watch, I would consult Mr. Dalton, and give him, Mr. Gudgeon, a decisive answer the next morning. This he declared himself willing to do, on which I took both the watch and my leave together, and returned home. The next morning I attended the office as usual, but of course took no notice to Mr. Dalton of the affair in hand. During the space of time I allotted myself for dinner, I again called on Mr. Gudgeon, and told him that I would keep the watch, provided he should receive the payment by instalments, as I could not afford to pay the whole price at once. I therefore proposed to give him the ensuing Saturday 1 or 2 guineas, as I should find most convenient, and to pay him ½ guinea a week afterwards, until the whole was liquidated. To this he readily agreed, and having fitted a key to the watch, he begged leave to show me some chains and seals. Of the former he had none but gilt ones. I selected one of the neatest, and a handsome gold seal. I then desired to have a bill of parcels of the whole, observing that, whenever I paid a sum upon account, Mr. Gudgeon could make a memorandum of it at the bottom by way of receipt. Having obtained this, I departed, promising to be punctual in paying my first instalment on the day appointed. This took place on Tuesday, the portmanteau being now on its way to London, and the same evening I quitted my lodgings privately, leaving nothing behind but a trunk containing brickbats and stones, and walked by moonlight to a village 4 miles distant, through which the stage coach was to pass next morning at 7 o'clock. I procured some supper at a decent public house, and retired to rest, desiring to be called in time for the coach. At the expected hour the stage made its appearance, in which I seated myself, and about 8 the same evening arrived at the Blue Boar, just 2 hours after the waggon, which I perceived standing in the yard. He received the portmanteau with little difficulty, and having disposed of its contents in various ways, lived upon the produce for 5 or 6 weeks, at the termination of which he thought it right to look out for a new situation. He found one in the office of Mr. Preston, a solicitor, and with the imprudence of dishonest persons entered upon it, though the office was next door to Dalton and Edwards, who had sent him down to Bury St. Edmunds. He was soon recognised by a clerk of Messrs. Dalton and Edwards, and being called into the parlour by Mr. Preston one morning, he was surprised at seeing his late master, who snatched the watch out of his fob, and promised to restore it to the owner. Rowe was then taken into custody, but a friend of his grandfather having come forward and indemnified Mr. Dalton for his loss, he was suffered to go at large, on a promise that he would quit London, where he was likely to come to disgrace and infamy, and endeavour to obtain employment in the country. The country had no charms for him, however, and he set about procuring a situation in some retail shop in town, for the sole purpose of embezzling the receipts. In consequence of an advertisement in a newspaper, he applied to a Mr. Gifford, the keeper of a masquerade warehouse, and there he obtained employment upon a forged representation of his good character. He did not fail at this place in collecting a good booty, and having at length, by means of stealing goods from the shop and embezzling money, which he had received on his master's account, secured about £60 worth of property, he suddenly absconded and commenced a round of dissipation and gaiety. He had been at large scarcely a fortnight, however, before he was taken into custody at the instance of his late master, and upon his prosecution he was committed to the Quarter Sessions, but there his good fortune aided him, and in consequence of some informality in the proceedings he was acquitted. Upon a second appearance at the same bar he was not quite so successful, and it appears that, having been detected in the act of picking pockets with a companion named Bromley, they were both secured, and having been convicted, they were, on the 23rd of September 1800, sentenced to 7 years' transportation. Rowe was sent to Port Jackson in the following May, and there he was assigned to a Mr. Baker, a storekeeper at Hawkesbury, about 26 miles from Parramatta, who appointed him clerk. In consequence of his good conduct during the ensuing 3 years, he was promoted to a place in the secretary's office in Sydney, but there, conspiring with his fellows in the commission of various frauds, he was discovered and sentenced to be worked in a road gang. During 2 months he continued in Sydney in this degraded condition, but then he was drafted to Castle Hill, a plantation 24 miles in the interior, and there, after about 10 months' service, he was appointed clerk to the superintendent of the works. Having subsequently served the office of clerk to the magistrates at Parramatta, he at length, on the 10th of February 1807, returned to England. There he found a woeful change had taken place, his father and his grandmother being dead, and all served to remind him of the sinful course of life he had led, and of his fallen condition. All his resolutions against returning to a dishonest mode of living were, however, unavailing, and at length he became a professed and a professional thief. In order the better to carry on his new trade, he associated himself with some fellows of dissolute habits, but at length meeting with his old friend Bromley, he resolved to quit his new companions, and to pursue his avocation with one accomplice only. In reference to his future proceedings, he says, "Having withdrawn myself from my late companions, I now became very circumspect in my proceedings, and as Bromley had neither the appearance nor the manners of a gentleman, I only made use of him occasionally in the course of my practice, keeping him in the background to receive and carry any articles which I purloined, and never suffering him to converse with or approach me except in private. I generally spent the mornings, that is from about 1 to 5 o'clock P.M., which are the fashionable hours for shopping, in visiting the shops of jewellers, watchmakers, pawnbrokers, &c. Having conceived hopes that this species of robbery would turn to a good account, and depending upon my own address and appearance, I determined to make a circuit of the town, and not to omit a single shop in either of those branches, and this scheme I actually executed so fully, that I believe I did not leave 10 shops untried in all London, for I made a point of commencing every day in a certain street, and going regularly through it on both sides of the way. My practice was to enter a shop and request to look at gold seals, chains, brooches, rings, or any other small articles of value, and while examining them, and looking at the shopkeeper in the face, I contrived by sleight of hand to conceal 2 or 3, sometimes more, in the sleeve of my coat, which was purposely made wide. On some occasions I purchased a trifling article to save appearances; at other times I took a card of the shop, promising to call again, and, as I generally saw the remaining goods returned to the window, or place from whence they were taken, before I left the shop, there was hardly a probability of my being suspected, or of the property being missed. In the course of my career I was never once detected in the fact, though on 2 or 3 occasions so much suspicion arose that I was obliged to exert all my effrontery and to use very high language in order, as the cant phrase is, to bounce the tradesman out of it, and my fashionable appearance and affected anger at his insinuations had always the effect of convincing him that he was mistaken, and inducing him to apologise for the affront put upon me. I have even sometimes carried away the spoil notwithstanding what had passed, and I have often gone a second and third time to the same shop, with as good success as the first. To prevent accidents, however, I made it a rule never to enter a second shop with any stolen property about me, for as soon as I quitted the first, I privately conveyed my booty to Bromley, who was attending my motions in the street, and herein I found him eminently useful. By this course of depredation I acquired on the average about £10 a week, though I sometimes neglected shopping for several days altogether. This was not indeed the only pursuit I followed, but was my principal morning's occupation, though if a favourable opportunity offered of getting a guinea by any other means, I never let it slip. In the evenings I generally attended one of the theatres, where I mixed with the best company in the boxes, and at the same time that I enjoyed the amusements of the place, I frequently conveyed pocket books, snuff boxes, and other portable articles from the pockets of their proprietors into my own. Here I found the inconvenience of wanting a suitable companion, who might have received the articles I made a prize of, in the same manner as Bromley did in the streets; but though I knew many of the light-fingered gentry, whose appearance fitted them for my company, yet their faces being well known to the police officers who attended the theatres, they would not have been suffered to enter the house, and herein I possessed an advantage which many of these gentry envied me, for being just arrived in England, and a new face upon the town, I carried on my depredations under the very noses of the officers without suspicion. Having therefore at first no associate, I was obliged to quit the theatre and conceal my first booty in some private spot before I could make, with prudence, a second attempt. Upon the whole, I was very successful in this pursuit, also at least as to the number of articles I filched, and had their value been reasonably proportionate to what I expected, I need not long have followed so hazardous an employment. I have very frequently obtained 9 or 10 pocket books, besides other articles, in an evening, and these being taken from gentlemen evidently of fortune and fashion, I had reason to expect I should some time meet with a handsome sum in bank notes. But fortune did not favour me therein, for during near 12 months' almost nightly attendance at one or other of the public places, I never found more than £20 in a book, and that only on one occasion. I several times got £5, £10, or £11, but commonly £1, £2, or £3, and most generally 4 books out of 5 contained nothing but letters, memorandums, and other papers useless to me. At the same time I knew frequent instances of the common street pickpockets getting a booty of 50, 100, and sometimes 300 or 400 pounds. However, I never failed to pay the expenses of the night, and if I gained nothing, I enjoyed at least a fund of amusement, which was to me the highest gratification. It sometimes happened that the articles I got, particularly pocket books, were advertised by the losers within a few days as lost, and a reward offered for their restoration. Where this reward was worth notice, I frequently restored the property by means of a third person to whom I could confide in, and whom I previously tutored for the purpose. In the meantime, the manner in which I spent my life, abstracted from the disgraceful means by which I supported myself, was, as I have formerly hinted, perfectly regular and inoffensive. Though I lived by depredation, yet I did not, like the abandoned class of common thieves, waste my money and leisure time in profligate debauchery, but applied myself to the perusal of instructive and amusing books, my stock of which I daily increased. I occupied genteel apartments in a creditable house, the landlord of which understood me to hold a situation under government, and every part of my conduct at home tended to confirm his opinion of my respectability. I was scrupulously exact in my paying my rent, as well as the different tradesmen in the neighbourhood with whom I had occasion to deal, nor did I ever suffer any person of loose character to visit me, but studiously concealed from those of my acquaintance my place of residence. I was sometimes indeed so imprudent as to resort, for company's sake, to some of those public houses frequented by thieves and other dissolute characters, the landlord of which is himself commonly an experienced thief or returned transport. When I had a mind to relax a little, or grew tired in domestication, I disguised my appearance as much as I could, and repaired to a house of this description, sometimes taking my Dulcinea with me, whom I shall shortly introduce to the reader, and whose person and dress I was not a little proud of exhibiting in public. This fondness for flash houses, as they are termed, is the rock on which most persons who live by depredation unhappily split, and will be found in the sequel to have brought me to my present deplorable condition, for the police officers, or traps, are in the daily habit of visiting these houses, where they drink with the thieves, &c., in the most familiar manner, and I believe often obtain secret information by various means from some parties respecting the names, characters, pursuits, &c. of others. By this imprudent conduct I also became personally known to many of the officers, which was productive of great danger to me in the exercise of my vocation, whereas had I avoided such houses I might have remained unknown and unsuspected by them for a series of years. The Dulcinea alluded to above was an unhappy girl of the town, whom he took into keeping and afterwards married. This poor creature behaved to him in the most exemplary manner, and proved by her conduct that she was worthy of a better fate. Going one day to a public meeting at the Mermaid Tavern, Hackney, he picked a gentleman's pocket of a silver snuff box, which he handed to the landlady. The box was missed by the owner, and on Vaux claiming it, he was taken into custody, but such is the glorious uncertainty of the law that he was acquitted on his trial, contrary to his own expectation. End of Part 69.